Hello, you're watching the Telco as a Platform Summit, part of our year-round DSP Leaders coverage. I'm Guy Daniels, and today's discussion looks at how to maximise the telco API opportunity. What are the necessary network implementations and challenges to realising the full potential of APIs, and how are API use cases evolving into more profitable areas such as network performance? Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the programme today are Henry Calvert, Head of Networks at GSMA, Mark Gilmour, Chief Technology Officer with ConnectiviTree Europe, and Grant Lenahan, who is Partner and Principal Analyst of Appledore Research. Hello everyone, it's good to see you all. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today. So let's start by asking, what is it we're talking about? What is the potential commercial market for telco APIs? Because we heard huge numbers last year. It was anything from $14 billion to $34 billion in the next 5 years. The numbers were really all over the place. But is the industry as bullish and as optimistic this year as it was perhaps last year? Grant, let me come across to you. What are you seeing from your contacts in the industry? Just how optimistic is the industry?
So I think there's a lot of optimism, probably a bit of over-optimism. But what I'd like to do is step back and get a broader perspective. APIs, and in particular the GSMA APIs, are one piece of a much bigger puzzle that the industry needs to execute if we want to have significant incremental growth. There are areas of interoperator APIs so that they can serve global players and supply chains. There are APIs around security and SD-WAN and zero trust. There is the need to put those security services and dynamic bandwidth services in place. And then layered into that are the actual APIs that may be for mobile services, maybe for broadband services. I'm sure we're going to hear more about that from people on this call. And then there are things around dynamic services to feed these supply chains. At one point, we did a bottoms-up accounting and thought we saw about $101 billion in incremental revenue that the industry could go after. But, to be fair, there was a long litany of things that the industry needed to do if it wanted to capture those. APIs alone are not sufficient. New security services alone are not sufficient. Bring those two together with 3 or 4 more, and suddenly you've got a very attractive proposition to others.
All right, thanks, Grant. So it's not, we shouldn't be looking at this in isolation. We have to look at this in parallel with other factors there. Henry, let me come across to you, because the GSMA has been supporting its members with APIs for a number of years in various forms. So what is a sentiment that you're seeing with regards the potential of telco APIs?
Yeah, I think there's 2 stories here. First of all, we've seen significant growth in the Camara-based APIs that have been launched by operators in the last 12 months. So in 2024, from the first half of 2024 to the second half of 2024, we've seen 120% value growth from APIs and the revenue that they are creating, predominantly in anti-fraud and predominantly in carrier billing, that we've seen that growth. What we want to see in the industry is a slight more acceleration around the coverage of those APIs that are being exposed by operators in other markets around the world. And I think that's sort of, if you look at the headline numbers of a forecast going forward, I think that forecast is delayed by 1 or 2 years of the figures that were sort of, McKinsey put out there of 100 billion by 2030. I think that's probably delayed 1 or 2 years. So the exciting potential is in the near term that we've just had. We've seen significant growth in the utilization and revenues coming from APIs. But we need more operators to launch those capabilities and actually drive forward.
Great. Thanks very much, Henry. We'll pick up on some of those growth areas later in the program. But Mark, I'd like to come across to you and get your views from the non-mobile industry, because it's not all about mobile APIs, is it? There's potential there in in APIs for other operators.
Yeah, that's right. But we are seeing some work, MEF, for example, starting now to work with the GSMA's Open API Camara project and things like that. So the as in everything, there's a convergence there. But yeah, in particular, on my side of the business where I am these days, we see the API market or the API usage as an enabler for business. So it's a bit difficult for me to be able to quantify or answer that question directly, whether it's optimistic or over optimistic, or if it's net new ads that are going to come as a result of APIs. And I tend to agree with Grant that it's part of the puzzle, but not really. But not really the answer to bringing in new revenue. I think it's much more nuanced than that. But what I have seen is a steady progress and a steady movement in the area where I'm involved, which is particularly with MEF, LSO, lifecycle service orchestration APIs that are really core and fundamental to what we're doing at ConnectiviTree, and I've seen a lot of movement in that, so that there's really a realistic proposition now for network as a service offerings, but that revolves around being able to set ourselves up with as a platform business, but also then have the relevant APIs to enable that to push on. So I think there's a cautious optimism. It would be how I would term it.
Great, thank you very much for that outlook, Mark. And let's go across to Grant again, because Grant, you want to pick up on this.
Yeah, I wanted to really draw an underscore under what Mark just said and strongly agree with him that some of the things that we're seeing parallel to the work that GSMA is doing and the Camara APIs is being driven within the MEF. And one of the great things about the MEF is they have fairly specific use cases that they are looking at, and therefore they get senior executives and senior operational people from major telcos around the world participating, and this is happening. And in fact, it's one of the areas that we saw a significant amount of the money in the forecast that we put together, some of which was as boring as getting more WAN bandwidth. But why'd you get the WAN bandwidth? Well, for two reasons. You introduced integral security services, and you made it easier and cheaper to interconnect supply chain partners and distributed design and manufacturing sites around the world. Now, the same exact thing can happen in the mobile industry as well. And I think taking a page from what the MEF has done and not entirely saying if we build it, they will come, but saying, look, we know some of the use cases around sensors, around distributed following of supply goods that are in transit on trains and planes and ships and things. There are big efficiencies to be had here. And they lend themselves perfectly to mobile. So I really wanted to emphasize what Mark was saying and say, frankly, some of those things are underlie some of the forecasts that we have done.
Great, thanks very much for that, Grant. And I'd also like just to remind our audience that yesterday's summit panel was all focused on platform economics and applying that to telco models. So if you haven't seen that, it is certainly worth looking at. Okay, so some of the early API use cases that we've seen have focused on areas like identity and subscriber management. And Henry, you mentioned anti-fraud APIs as well. But where are the more profitable APIs, maybe those focused on network performance? When do we move beyond the easy wins? And Henry, I'd like to come to you first, because you mentioned some of these early APIs, and you also mentioned the need to expand coverage. So where are we at, and when might we see this transition?
So certainly, I think, anti-fraud and authentication is a marketplace that has been existing for a fair amount of years now, 5-6 years in that account. And that's growing strength, and that's driving the coverage needs, both regionally and globally around the world. And we're now starting to see connectivity insights and also communications quality as two sectors that are really quite interesting. Connectivity insights is giving you an idea of the performance that the end user or the endpoint is actually getting, whether that's latency, whether that's signal strength, whether that's sort of the characteristics of the network that it actually has around the situation that endpoint is in, on a mobile network, on a fixed network, etc. So there's a lot of insights that are coming through on that. From communications quality, there's two sides that we're actually seeing. Everyone's hearing about quality on demand at this point in time, and we actually demonstrated that with Colt and Orange and also MEF to actually show how it could be also orchestrated to provide a network slice across end-to-end from 2 points, which is quite exciting actually. It's the first time that ever mobile and fixed have sort of orchestrated between the two there. So that was a really good insight to see that value coming through. But also on the quality of connectivity, it's also understanding sort of where the edge and storage compute is, with that simple question of where's my nearest edge point. So applications can start to actually be deployed in networks closer to the endpoint users, to start to deliver the better latency that may be expected from whether it's gaming or whether it's automation in that account. Where this comes into a real practical world is where we see from maybe automotive industries that want to actually be able to actually understand how the car is performing, or maybe providing some assistance to the car. I'm not going to move all the way to autonomous driving at this point in time, because we've got a long way to go to actually ensure that the capabilities are there. We've also seen sort of from e-commerce platforms on payment, the last 15 seconds of a transaction when people are actually completing that authorization is very important to actually get a higher standard network, a higher quality network, to ensure that payment goes through. And in tests that we've actually done, we've seen 15 to 20% improvement already, in proof of concepts of transactions being more successful and not failing in that last sort of 15 seconds of what's happening. So that's asking for a better network for those last 15 seconds that's going on. And then lastly, even as simple as we've all experienced it on low-cost airlines, where your bag needs to be scanned before you board the plane because everyone is taking on luggage on board the plane and there's not enough space. There's been significant delays, which frustrates customers because the simple scanning machine can't get the information back to the logistics of what's actually happening. So we're seeing quality on demand being applied in that use case as well. So there's just, we're in anti-fraud. We want to move out to comms quality, and we want to ensure that quality on demand is one of the Camara-based APIs that are fully utilized to actually provide more opportunities.
Yeah, and there'd be a lot of interest in that, Henry. Thanks very much for that overview. Let me come across to Grant for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on some good points that Henry was making, but also caution that when we think about quality, I see too much discussion about how do we get companies to pay more for services. And we need to remember that there is a long history of all industries wanting to pay less, not more. The thing is, they need more services, period, right? And how do we make that convenient? So quality, improved quality is important, but what is really important is that you get the right quality. So there may be use cases like finishing financial transactions, or even just, a settlement on a purchase, where you do need better quality to ensure that it goes through and drive up sales. But you may also have a wide number of offers where you can put sensors on the network very cheaply because they don't require great quality. They require assured delivery, but latency really may not matter to a lot of these. So I think there's going to be a need for extremely convenient services, being able to automatically and instantly provision a soft SIM, some kind of a device on a network. A set of creative, plans, if you will, not very non-traditional plans that allow new use cases to be cost effective. And then, yes, being able to match the quality characteristics to the needs of the service. And it's all got to be done in a way that's really convenient for a third-party developer to do this, if we want the maximum uptake. It's going to be like going on Amazon. I don't need to know a lot to buy something. Hopefully it's going to be just as easy to do business with, our clients.
Yeah, good points. Thanks very much, Grant. And a lot of drivers there to consider. Mark, let's come across to you as well.
Now, I don't want to be a voice of negativity, but maybe just a voice of realism here. Is that those easy wins that we're talking about moving beyond? Actually, they have taken some time to get to where they are today. If I think on the NAS side, the network as a service side of APIs, what they're being called now, I look at, I first came into contact with them, and others have been involved with them much before that, but I came into contact with them around 2018, 2019, and very much the concepts were there just in the lab, in trials. And actually, it reminded me of a conversation that Grant and I had about 2.5 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, where, we were talking about what progress has been made in this field. And he introduced me to a couple of players that have been working in this space. And it was interesting and encouraging for me to see how progress had been made and was starting to lift some of those concepts out of lab, out of trial, and out of proof of concept and into more commercial opportunities. And I think that is something that, here it's a bit of a call to arms, I suppose, or a call to action, to keep that momentum going, because some of the delay in achieving those easy wins was because of the transformation that needed to be done in our networks to be able to take advantage of any sort of automation, but in particular APIs. So now it's a case of building on top of those. Now, hopefully that transformation is well underway in most operators and most network providers, that then can allow incremental benefits to come with additional use cases like we've been talking about. But I think we should be mindful that this thing takes time, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. And perhaps it's a bit unfair for us to say, easy wins, because obviously it hasn't been easy. We must acknowledge that. Thanks for those points. And Henry, let's come across to you, because I think you wanted to pick up here.
Yeah, I just wanted to I think exactly what Mark actually says. It's taken a long time to actually develop the technologies behind this. But also I wanted to pick up on Grant's point before, is there's a lot of work we have to do to educate the enterprises that these capabilities are available and are going to provide benefits, productivity benefits for the enterprises. So I just wanted to make that point. The journey's not over at all. There's a lot more people rather than just the telecommunications industry. We have to educate. We have to educate those enterprises to actually understand the benefits that are actually coming from the exposure capabilities from the networks that we're actually doing, whether they're mobile or fixed. And that is a long, long journey in itself to get their confidence, because at the end of the day, they're the buyers. And we've got to make sure that they are so happy that they want to actually drive the demand for these services.
Yeah, good point, Henry. Thanks very much for making that one. I want to move on, move the conversation on to a slightly different area, because the dramatic growth that we're seeing in AI could well impact APIs And we're hearing already that the nature of API calls is expected to change, especially if this potential of agents, the agentic AI, if that is realized. So I'm wondering if we are clear yet on what impact this might have on telcos' APIs. It's a tricky area, but Mark, can I come across to you to get some your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Guy, any good panel session needs to have at least one question about AI in there, doesn't it? But yeah, for sure, this is going to have an impact, particularly if we think about agentic AI and what it is hoped it will achieve in actually being able to make decisions. So by making decisions, then that naturally means more complexity. And what we have noticed in how we've been building our network as a service platform and approach is that a lot of the work that has gone on in the past has been about kind of bidirectional or one-to-one an API call, rather than here. I think we're talking then about a series of calls or multiple API calls or decision points being made, and so it's not just a single entity approach. Now we're adopting this from a platform point of view, not necessarily from an agentic AI point of view, but from an approach in that the APIs need to develop to be not just a single call type of thing, but actually have multiple ways of handling or multiple calls going out and being able to pull on that. So I think increased complexity is probably something that is a given that's going to come as a result of agentic AI getting involved in the process. And the other thing that kind of springs to my mind is just how AI will deal with the API calls, the outputs, whether it's as deterministic as we expect. I think that bit is still unclear for me in terms of whether it will be as clear cut or whether we'll get some unpredictable outcomes.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. I can see a massive increase in volumes, much shorter durations. They're in and out calls. There's more sources, but this whole what they do with the output and how they treat the output, that's an interesting area to look at. Henry, let's come across to you. Have you got any thoughts about how the increase in AI, in particular agent-based AI, might impact APIs?
Yeah, I think we're just at the start of understanding what the impact of AI is on the networks. As you say, it's going to be larger volumes, so there's going to be different profiles, and we need to actually understand those profiles. And the point I wanted to make is we're going to have to think about building networks for AI in the future, because it's certainly here, it's certainly going to stay around. And I think there's a lot of NAS that can, and exposure of network capabilities that can support legitimate AI use cases out there in the industry. And how you provision the service, how that service is provided with the service level agreement that's actually needed for the AI agents to actually work, and there may be complexities in routing to ensure that the AI is getting the right information from the different sensors, data points, data structures that it's actually going. So my point is, we've got to start thinking. We're at the beginning of this journey. It's and it's rapidly changing on us. So we've got to start thinking about how do we need to architect networks for AI, rather than just give best efforts to the AI tools.
Yeah, thanks very much, Henry. It's a real good point, isn't it? Building networks for AI, and that's certainly something we're seeing in our parallel defining 6G series that we're running at the moment. Grant, let me come across to you. What are your thoughts here?
I'm going to keep this quite short and take it in a slightly different direction. I think I agree with everything that the previous commenters have said. But when we look at the shift in the industry toward distributed supply chains, toward new workloads coming into the network, toward differentiated services and advanced manufacturing and all of these use cases. I think one of the biggest challenges is we are and this is not meant in a disparaging way, we are a utility industry. We are built around managing highly efficiently large, multi-billion and frankly trillion-dollar networks and allocating them efficiently and keeping them up 99.999% of the time. And this does not beget a creative, innovative, fast-changing culture. It's always been a problem in the industry. And I think similarly, it's opaque to outsiders. So I guess my question is, how might AI change that? Could AI and agents help us understand better what services to offer, how to target them, and how to deliver them? Could AI agents, to Mark's point, greatly change the offered load of API calls because it has ideas of how to use network capabilities, whether it's quality of service, whether it is a new package, whether it's identity, location, availability, in ways that maybe humans haven't really stumbled upon yet. And then there's its third aspect, that AI itself could become a service. I'm not actually all that hopeful that we'll be seeing AI workloads owned by telcos and delivered and sold by telcos. Because they've been kind of slow to, data center style services in the past, but they could definitely be involved in it with partnerships. So I think there's three ways that AI could break down the conservatism of the industry and enable more rapid growth and maybe more success. But as everyone has said, we're so early, it's really hard to predict the future accurately.
Yeah, quite right. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Grant. And if any of our viewers got thoughts on these answers and responses, please send them in, and we'll discuss them in the live show later. Okay, so let me move on then, and move on quite nicely actually. It's quite links. Will telcos really open up their networks and offer this access to their valuable network capabilities, or will their inherent conservatism, as we've just heard, we're talking about utility companies at the end of the day, mean that they miss out on this potential growth opportunity? Mark, what are your thoughts about the reality here?
Well, the reality for where we stand is that we are working with a spectrum of partners that range from the ultra conservative to the frankly right on the edge there of being of moving forward and publishing everything out. And what we've had to do is we've had to build our systems in such a way to accommodate that range of spectrum in an alliance approach. So I think fortune will favor the brave in this. Because it will lead to, in certainly in the use case that we're working with, I think it will lead to better outcomes for our overall customers, particularly those large global enterprises and enterprises that are looking for that resilient connectivity that actually our industry delivers so well. That is built out of that natural conservatism. But there is a culture clash here that has to be faced in terms of from an operational point of view. We are used as an industry to being extremely protective of our networks, how they're built, how they're resourced, how they perform resiliently, and any perceived loss of control of that is not in keeping with the nature of how we build and operate networks. So I think there is a danger of losing out in terms of being overly cautious, overly conservative in the approach, and I would love to see movement towards more operational use of APIs across operators, across in our instance, an alliance that therefore enables better service assurance for the end customer, for the end user, that really elevates those services that we deliver, and kind of maintains that standard, whatever standard we want to call it these days. It used to be called carrier grade, gold standard, whatever. But we're used to creating and managing these incredibly efficient or resilient networks.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Mark. And I'd like to throw this across to Henry and pick up on something that Henry said earlier, because I wonder if this sort of inherent conservatism you see so often in telcos is at odds with what you were saying earlier, Henry, about the need to be really appealing to the developers. And we all recognise this, don't we? We all recognise that we need to make these services through these APIs appealing and easy to use for developers. So that's got to be a bit of a tricky problem to solve.
Yeah, it is a classic balance, and just to support what Mark says, mobile and fixed line networks are now so prevalent in our lives. They are critical national infrastructures, and that comes with a privilege and an onerous task of ensuring that services and life is delivered on a daily basis. We see when there are security breaches, the damage that can be done. We see when there are network outages that there are significant impacts to life and lifestyles. So we've got to be very conscious about the assets that we are running. And yet a healthy tension about making sure the right policies are in place, even with exposing identity information. There is a significant discussion around the privacy and the consent from the endpoint or the customers at the end of the day. And this debate is still happening, and it's happening in a very moderated fashion. And I think, people's expectations are high. They're high to look for new opportunities, but we have to do it at the right moderated pace to ensure the right processes, the right security, the right testing and checks are in place to see how we do open up the networks and these critical national infrastructures that we have, across, a global scale. So, we need to have an exciting future. And we've seen the innovation impact that's been happening over the last 2 decades. But we've got to make sure that it remains stable. And that's always very conscious in the standardization of not only what the GSMA does, but what the TM Forum does, and also what MEF does.
Yeah, thanks very much, Henry. And that is the reality. That's the balance we've got to achieve. Thanks very much for those responses. Well, I'd like to move it on to a final question for this session, if I can. And I want to ask, what do you think is the best way to achieve success for telcos with regards to APIs? Is it with industry groups and initiatives? Is it with partnerships with like hyperscalers? Or is a successful strategy really down to the individual telco to just stake its claim and go for it? Grant, I'd love you to start us off with your thoughts on what's the best way forward.
All of the above. But no, let's back up a little bit. I think the first is that it really is all of the above. I think all the panelists have talked about things that we need for success throughout the hour. But you've got to start with, a colleague of mine used to say, you can't sell from an empty wagon. And his sort of farm witticism, is wise. If you don't have the services, if you don't have the security services, if you don't have good location information available, if you don't have whatever, having an API on something that's insufficient is not terribly helpful. I think industry groups and initiatives, though, are very, very important for a simple reason. We've seen API efforts in the past that failed because carrier A's APIs were slightly different from carrier B's. And if you are a company operating on a global scale, you need uniform capabilities everywhere that you sell. The danger of this, of course, is the least common denominator. But by getting together and having one vision of what is going to be enabled, you at least minimize the least common denominator tax. I think there's a second piece, which is it was brought up with the idea of, will the conservatism that's inherent in networks, often worrying about impacts on performance or security or other very legitimate concerns, will that block take up? And I think the answer is it could if we're not careful. Openness and making this widely available is incredibly important. Making it easy to consume is incredibly important. And I think recognizing that telcos will not be the integrators and own most of these services. They'll be created by all the vertical industries and public agencies is very, very important. I think there's also something which I think Mark touched on very quickly, and I was very pleased to hear. We need to remember that putting an API on legacy systems is simply going to make things very clunky, very laborious, probably very ineffective. Underlying effective APIs is another major initiative of the industry. It's autonomy. The idea that I can simply say, I need a path from point A to point B with these SLA characteristics. Hey, network, go figure it out. That is what enables fast, easy API transactions, commerce, and incremental revenues, right? And getting that right not only drives revenues, but it eliminates what could be a high source of costs. So I really do think it's all of the above. I think it's making the tools available very widely. One thing you brought up is it working with hyperscalers, and the answer there too is yes, but it's working with wherever we see congregations of developers outside of telco and congregations of applications outside of telco, whether they're financial or public service, that can be mashed together with network capabilities, identity capabilities, location capabilities to make something work better. And the more touch points we have for that, the more services will be bought. The more services that will be bought, the more revenue will come in the door.
Great. Thank you very much, Grant. And hyperscalers certainly have those congregations of developers and applications that they've built up. We're quite envious of what they have access to there. Mark, are we able to come across to you and get some final thoughts on the right strategy? Is it all of the above, or is there any areas that you feel should be prioritized, perhaps?
Perhaps for me to illustrate my answer to this question, I can kind of give you my thought process in establishing ConnectiviTree and in establishing the network as a service approach that we took. As part of our building that out, we wanted to create a global alliance. As Grant said, if you're going to operate in a global market, you need that approach that all can sign up to. And very quickly, it made sense to me that if I was to go this alone and try and develop something from scratch that was my way of doing things, to then be able to get that implemented in, the 20 odd plus partners that we've announced to date, and the other 50 to 100 that we're working with in the background there, the workload to do that in adjusting and adapting to everybody's way of approaching it, that just didn't make sense. And I actually took as a kind of inspiration from this in the work that has happened in mobile and in cellular over the last 3 decades or so, in that movement towards a global standardization that allowed then ubiquity of service and capability across the globe in whatever operator's network that one is resident in. And so, to answer this question, I do believe that an alliance, an industry body, or a group initiative really does help, because it's about bringing like-minded organizations together to try to solve a common challenge and a common problem in a common way. And Grant is right, you do have the lowest common denominator challenge that has to be overcome. But I think if you've got a grounding point using some sort of standardized or industry-led approach, it means that it can be built upon and developed from. Going back to the question earlier on about how do we manage multiple API calls, or rather than just one-on-one, that's a piece that can be built on top of an industry standard approach or something. So I really do think that you've got to, the telco or the company has to start with that vision itself. It has to be self-motivated to get into this, but then quickly working with other interested parties in alliances such, and we've mentioned the three main ones today. TM, Forum, MEF, and the GSMA there, in terms of the areas that you as a company, as an industry, or focused in. Picking up and utilizing those, I think really does help accelerate and bring the whole market, elevates the whole industry up, and makes it a faster time to adoption and a faster time to scale. Because I think scale is the issue here and is the challenge. If you're looking outward, looking inward, then go ahead. There, it works. Build your own internal APIs and things. But if we want to outsource or publish those for others to work in, we're now talking about an external market to utilize those. So it makes sense to have some level of commonality that people can work from. We've seen that in other markets, in other industries, marketplaces and things like that, where the APIs are understood and published, then they can be utilized.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mark. And I've got to lead across to Henry now. Because you were saying about how group initiatives help. So Henry, I mean, the Open Gateway is 2 years old now? Am I slightly wrong in my maths there? But what is it that appeals to what you can do as an association on that wider scale?
Yeah, I'm pleased that the Open Gateway and what the GSMA is sort of spearheading is very much supported not only by TMF and MEF, but let's not forget the Linux Foundation. And I think if we didn't cooperate together and understand each other's roles, then it would be very confusing to the industry at large about what's actually happening. So I don't think the GSMA can take credit. I think all four have to take credit in what's actually been taken in such a short period of time of just 2 years. As you're right there, it is 2 years, but it's gone so quickly. I tell you, it happens. There's one voice I'd like to bring in. Mark's talked very well and articulately almost about the inside out. Inside our networks, people are starting to use APIs. If not, it's becoming the predominant way to deliver base services. And we're starting to expose those APIs, and it's almost we build it and they will come. And we've got to take an outside-in approach as an industry, all of us. We've got to actually start listening to the enterprises. They're the people who are the customers now. They are the people who are paying and going to be the people who actually say whether our services work or not. If we don't listen to them and start building standards to what their requirements are and what their needs are as an industry and all our associations, I think it's going to be a long, long road to sell things. I think we've got to deliver what they need. It's all commercial. We've got 40 channel partners, which you can call aggregators, hyperscalers, or anything, that are actually driving forward. Same sort of issues they've actually got. Where is the demand? Where is it coming from? It's going to come from the enterprises. And we need to actually listen, talk to them, let them have a voice at the table on what we need to do to make NAS and network API exposure really make a value in the industry for everyone.
Indeed. Henry, thanks very much for that. Well, we must leave it there. I'm sure we will continue this debate during our live Q&A show later. But for now, thank you all for taking part in the discussion. And if you're watching this on day 2 of our Telco as a Platform Summit, then please do send us your questions and we'll answer them in our live Q&A show, which starts at 4 p.m. UK time. The full schedule of programmes and speakers can be found on the TelecomTV website, and that's where you'll also find the Q&A form and our poll question. So please vote if you have yet to do so. For now though, thank you for watching and goodbye.